All right. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the public input meeting for the reconstruction of North 4th Street from Demers Avenue to 1st Avenue North in Grand Forks. It's a beautiful day in Grand Forks. So if you did request the Zoom link to this meeting, you will be receiving an email after the meeting, and it will ask you to complete the sign-in sheet for this meeting, as well as a Title VI participation survey for the North Dakota Department of Transportation. We do ask that you complete these things for two reasons. Number one, we do want to know who is present at the meeting and who they represented, and that helps us kind of parse out the comment when we do get it later for this meeting, so that we know if it's coming from someone who lives or works directly adjacent to the project, if it's someone who lives in this community, if it's somebody who has involvement with, say, an advisory group or something of that nature. We really are interested in the cross-section of people that we're reaching and the representation that we do get at these meetings. So please, when you see that come across, fill that out. Today, what we want to go through is get through a discussion of what improvements are currently proposed along North 4th Street, talk about some of the different alternatives for what that might include. And the biggest thing, the huge thing that we're here for today is to get public input on this project, because we want to know what people have concerns about, what they want to know before the design of the project is completed. And that will help to kind of address a lot of those issues up front and not when it's, I won't say too late to address them, but it's easier to address things up front and in the middle of everything rather than after things are already 90% complete. So for the Zoom meeting participation, if you need to raise your hand to speak by phone, you just press *9. On the computer, there's some instructions here. There's a reactions on the Zoom menu bar, and then you can just raise your hand, and then you can be recognized that way. And if you're on a phone or a tablet, click more and then raise your hand. There's also a chat box that you can chat with everyone in this meeting or just to me. For example, if you start to have technical difficulties, if your audio drops off or something and you can't hear us anymore, chat me. And that way we can try and troubleshoot things on the side to make sure that you can get reconnected. And then we can also connect with you privately after the meeting to catch you up on anything that you may have missed, in addition to providing you with the recording. We'll also provide via email a comment sheet after the meeting that can be mailed in if you want to take some additional time. Email is fine too, but some people prefer the written communication methods, so we will provide that via email to anybody who attended this meeting as well, or anybody who requests it within the comment period. Okay, so with no further ado, we will get on to the whole reason that we're here, is to talk about what improvements are currently being proposed. And of course, the reason that there's a project in the first place is that there's a need for it. The project that we're looking at doing here is located along North 4th Street, and it'll be between Demers Avenue and 1st Avenue North. And you'll notice in the upper right corner of this figure, the north arrow is kitty corner. That's actual north. And so when we talk about north, south, east, west, for the purposes of this discussion, east will be toward the river and north will be toward Gateway Drive. So just for clarity, when we talk north, south, east, west, always think of the river as being east. And I think that helps to clarify things when true north is not opposite. One or the other. Why are we doing this project? Well, the roadway out there is aged and it's exhibiting a lot of distress out there. There's some cracking out there. There's some sags. There's been some patching out there, and that's resulted in some poor ride quality on the road. And the roadway itself was constructed back in 1938, and there have been some minor improvements along the way. There was a couple of asphalt overlays, one somewhere between that original construction and 1999, just because it was on the 1999 construction drawings. We know it was done. But there was also some selective curb and gutter replacement, and a mill and overlay constructed in 1999. So overall, that roadway, the original roadway, is over 80 years old, and it's kind of time for it to be replaced. But there's also some opportunities here to provide some improved ADA compliance out there. And so we will have some improvements in the project to address that as well. The project will be facilitated by the City of Grand Forks, but it'll be administered through the North Dakota Department of Transportation local government. It'll be funded under the Urban Grant Program, and that's federal funding. And it has a cap, though, on the federal funding of 1.6 million. So how the project will be paid for the construction, of the construction costs, about 80.93% of those costs will be federally funded, with the remaining 19.07 being city funded. However, once that $1.6 million cap is reached, anything over that cap will be 100% city funds. And is currently scheduled for construction next year during the 2022 construction season.
You said it was 1.6 is where that 80.93 cuts off?
Yes, so that split will apply up to that cap.
Okay.
And then anything over 1.6 will be 100% city.
And that funding is only on eligible items. There are some items that NDDOT or these federal fundings do not cover. So there is some limitation on that, but more or less everything will fall underneath an eligible item. So.
That's correct. So as part of this project, there will be a number of different things under consideration. The obvious improvement is the reconstruction of the roadway itself. ADA improvements, again, some of those are obvious because people will see new curb ramps, new detectable warning panels out there, but some of the things that people may not realize are ADA improvements are things like making sure that the sidewalk slopes out there are conducive to ADA accessibility and things like that. So those will be included no matter what alternative is selected, as well as removal of the existing street lighting and new street lighting installation. Streetscape features, which I'm sure you're familiar with from Demers Avenue reconstruction, but we will provide some more information in the coming slides about what those will look like. And then there will either be bulb outs, which are the extended curb corners so that the pedestrian crossings are shorter in length, or some enhanced multimodal features, which may include separated bicycle lanes or bus lanes. And these improvements are consistent with the city's planning objectives for downtown. They'll provide continuity with the recent projects downtown, like Demers Avenue and the ongoing construction on North 3rd Street. But they'll also take into consideration some concepts and recommendations from recent studies that have been done on the downtown area, and we'll get further into those as well. So we talked a little bit about streetscape features. What are those? What does streetscaping mean? That'll mean things like decorative sidewalks, some pavers out there, some seat planters, new trees, potential bases for decorative lighting downtown here, and things like bike racks, benches, trash cans that aren't just your standard can. And again, those will be similar to features recently installed on Demers and on North 3rd. So what these might look like if you haven't seen them already, this is an example of a seat planter that will eventually have some flowers in it. So you can see those decorative sidewalk features, a nice finished look to it. The benches in the lower left corner with some plantings, decorative bike racks, the new trees and the floral accents to those. So it really will make for a nice looking continuity with the recent improvements to the downtown area. The trash can that you see will be a little different from that was recently installed on Demers Avenue, but will have a color scheme that will go along with the surrounding area. So what might those look like and where might they be? Again, there's just some pictorial representation of the decorative features, and they would be located between the curb line and the buildings. And so again, very similar to the recent construction on Demers Avenue, But this is just a concept of where and how they might be laid out and what they might look like along that corridor. So with any construction projects, you're going to have some temporary impacts that occur, as we well know, downtown here. And what we anticipate those will include for this project will be temporary impacts to vehicles. We're going to have some detours out there. Pedestrians, same thing. We may have to walk, around the construction for a little ways. And also bicycle routes. Right now, there aren't separated bicycle facilities in that area, so the bicycles would be detoured with the vehicular traffic as well. There will be replacement of the existing trees. One thing that I think is going to be important to clarify is any tree replacement would be in the city right-of-way. So we don't anticipate removal of any private vegetation or trees. We want to also make sure we do know that we have some historically registered properties along that corridor. So we want to protect those resources, and there's actually a study underway to tell us what and where those are to anticipate. And the project requirements for construction will also include what's called a discovery plan that will tell the contractor what to do if they find something as they're digging out there. So there will be requirements to protect those resources. We also anticipate that any accesses to businesses along the corridor would remain open throughout the entire duration of the project. There won't ever be a time where you literally cannot get to your front door. So we do anticipate incorporating that requirement into the project. And when we're all done, we'll have a nicer road. It'll have better ride quality. It'll have better pedestrian safety for downtown, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and how the sidewalks will be constructed differently than they exist today. We talked a little bit more about improving that ADA accessibility, which will be great for downtown. We'll have that nice streetscape appearance that's contiguous with the new projects downtown. And we may also have some enhanced multimodal features for bikes and buses, as we'll get into in a little bit here. So Jen, to your question as well, property and pedestrian access during construction. So at any given time, a sidewalk will have to be reconstructed along here. So what we've done, and this may change during the development of the project, but we have identified a way to phase the pedestrian access. And so you would always have access to your front door, except when they do the work directly on the sidewalk in front of it. But we anticipate that being scheduled at a time that each specific doorway is going to be closed. So if there's a business along there that operates starting at 11 a.m., we would anticipate working there in the morning and then again after close. So what we would anticipate originally is that the west side of the First Avenue North intersection sidewalks would be one of the first to be built. And any path that you see in green here would remain open. Then the sidewalks would be built on the east side of the intersection, and you'd be able to cross here, here, and here.
I have a question. Do you want me to save questions first and foremost?
No, I think if we have just a few that are beneficial for everybody, that'd be great.
On phase one here,
Yeah.
Does that have us walking through the parking garage then to get from point A to point B?
No, it would not. It
Okay.
would not. Like if you need to get across the street, you would come over to
But
Demers.
if I'm going from that, let's say the Social Security building to Central,
Yep.
would I have to come back to Demers and then around?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yep. However, we wouldn't anticipate that would be a significantly long duration because that sidewalk construction goes pretty fast.
Yeah.
Yep. And then we would basically have phase 3A and 3B. So we would construct one of these two at any given time and you'd be able to walk straight through, but you potentially wouldn't be able to cross it first here. And then in the end, we would construct this last piece in here and you would be able to cross at either end. Okay, we will talk in a little bit here about a potential construction option that would include some construction in the Demers Avenue intersection. And basically we would provide temporary pedestrian crossings around that. So you wouldn't have to go much farther than the edge of the intersection to cross there for pedestrians. Vehicular traffic would be detoured a block over but pedestrians would be able to go around the intersection construction if that alternative was chosen. So what alternatives are we looking at? We have two that are currently remaining under consideration. We started with quite more than that, and they included various configurations of driving and parking lane widths, having bike lanes or sharrows, which are the shared vehicular and bicycle lanes similar to what you see on University Avenue in town here. We looked at some bus lane and bus stop options, as well as different widths of the sidewalk and boulevards. And when we talk about the boulevard, we would be referring to the area between the curb line and the sidewalk. So basically what I'll call the non-walking area of the sidewalk. And we have one layout that we are considering the base layout. And the reason that we're considering that the base layout is that it was the configuration that was used to secure the urban grant program funding. And it was a configuration used in that application. So because that configuration exists in all the previous documents, we are considering that to be the basis layout. And it also is most similar to what exists today. We'd have parallel parking on both sides of the road, and it would also be pretty similar in look to improvements on Demers and 3rd. And we also have an additional alternative that looks quite different, that would not have the curb bump outs that you've recently seen, but would have bus lanes and protected bicycle lanes. So what would those look like? The preliminary geometric layout of the basis alternative basically would connect to the new bump outs at Demers Avenue. It would have similar bump outs constructed at First Avenue North.
Oh.
And it would have 16-foot wide driving lanes in general. So wide enough for vehicular and bicycle traffic. And there would be a left turn lane from 4th to Demers. First Avenue North would be straight through on both sides, and the side streets, with the exception of the addition of the bump outs, would retain their current configurations. We would maintain parallel parking on both sides of the road, and there would be an 8-foot sidewalk, and that's a little wider sidewalk than either Demers Avenue or 3rd Street have in the new construction. And the reason that we would like to see that a little wider is because of the existence of Central on the next block. And so we'd like to see a little bit wider pedestrian path in there to accommodate the additional pedestrian traffic. And then there would be another 6.5 feet between the sidewalk and the road. And you can see here would be those streetscape features, the street lighting, benches, trash cans, things like that. And so if a person was standing on the street, this is what we anticipate that they would see. So with Central High School being in the lower right corner off the screen, this would be looking toward Demers Avenue down 4th.
I didn't realize that it was this intersection. I thought it was just down to that corner. That's like so much more exciting.
It is very exciting. So, and you see some of those streetscape features off to the side. So we do think that this would produce a nice looking functional corridor for the downtown area. Nope.
On First Avenue,
Mm-hmm.
no decorative sidewalk feature down towards west.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. The intersection improvements would end basically where we would need to go to tie in elevation wise for any changes that were made in the intersection itself to accommodate the bump outs.
But the sidewalk would still go back. It just wouldn't be.
Yes.
There. I mean, the street would still go.
Yes.
Cool.
Yep, we would still connect everything up, but the decorative features would stop at the end.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for letting me ask tons of questions.
Absolutely, that's what we're here for. So the other thing too is how, up next to Demers Avenue with the left turn lane, how would that all fit in there? And you can kind of see how the streetscape features, like we talked about, would be located in between the curbs and the buildings. but there's still enough room on the back sides of those to walk. And so when we get into comparing the alternatives later, when we talk about the passable width of the sidewalk, keep in mind here, this is a good example to show that the sidewalk may be wide, but there's a couple of spots where those decorative features encroach into that area. So when we talk about passable width, we'll be talking about the area that is available to walk. So the figure that you see here is excerpted from a study that was prepared by KLJ for the Grand Forks, East Grand Forks MPO. And this came out last fall. And this alternative basically is an opportunity to incorporate enhanced multimodal features in the downtown area. And as you can see here, this would be an image from Demers Avenue, looking north along North 4th, and would incorporate separated bike lanes. And by separated, we mean having a median in between vehicular traffic and the traveled bike lane. And as you can see here as well, it would carry those features out into the Demers Avenue intersection as well. So what would that look like in comparison to the basis alternative as you're looking as the crow flies? So along North 4th Street, we would still have a northbound and a southbound driving lane, but they'd be much narrower rather than the 16 feet that we had before. Each of the driving lanes would be about 10 feet wide. We would have parallel parking for about half of the west side of the block, because of the transitional features incorporated in this alternative, the remainder of the parking would be deleted. Each side of the road, northbound and southbound, would have its own one-way separated bicycle lane that would go in the same direction as the adjacent traffic. There would also be on the east side of the road, so going northbound, a separate lane for buses to travel. And as you see on the north side of the intersection at 1st Avenue North, we would have to provide some continuity of these features across the intersection in order that the traffic from the existing roadway could transition into that. So the ends of the project, the termini, would become longer than the other alternative because, for example, at Demers Avenue, we can't take that bike lane to Demers Avenue and just have it dead end. We would have to have a place for it to go. And you would see here as well that there are no bump outs on the through direction of North 4th. So the pedestrian crossings would be significantly different than the basis alternative. And that is the reason why this alternative would have to include the reconstruction of the Demers Avenue intersection. The sidewalk here would be about 9 feet wide, but the traversable area actually of the sidewalk will be a little narrower because of the streetscape features. So when we get to comparing these two options, just shortly here, we do have a table that will show how wide those traversable areas would be. And again, as you can see, both in the bird's eye view figure and the cross section below, there would be a raised median in between the roadway and the bike lanes. So I'll just give a minute to kind of digest the figure a little bit and process kind of some of the visual differences.
This is maybe a really interesting question. What if there was another project going on sometime at the same time, like another construction project going on, and that entrance that's on the east side of the street was no longer there?
This one here?
Yeah.
Jen, can you see our cursor?
Yep.
Okay, so Blue is asking if this driveway were to be gone, basically this opening would close and that median for the bike lane would just continue across there.
And that's where the bus lane is, right there?
The bus lane is actually just this piece right here. This would be a potential bus stop area.
Oh, okay.
That's why it's wider here. And so the bus travel lane would be here. but it can only go this far because it doesn't continue past the First Avenue intersection. So it would have to transition back into the vehicular traffic lane before it got there.
I'm sure this conversation's already been had. Is there potential to not have the bus lane, but just have the protected bike lane and have the parking be part of that protection?
Basically, this option as it exists because of its existence in the downtown traffic study.
Mhm.
So the discussion of those alternatives, we believe, would have been hashed out as part of that, and this would have been the preferred incorporation of those features. So as far as our current analysis or our current consideration and layout has gone, we have taken that option as it existed.
Okay.
Yep.
And the only reason I bring it is in our conversations with City Areas Transit, one of the advantages of the bike share being successful is that it is requiring less stops for the City Areas Transit, because now those drop-off points with a bike share system, it enables them to be able to not have to have more stops everywhere, but they can really use the bike share to get to and from 2 blocks, 3 blocks, stuff like that. So that's the only reason I bring it up.
Okay, Jen, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a couple of comments.
Okay.
So my first being, has anybody taken in the consideration that that property next to me is to be developed?
Yes, it has been. However, the final modifications for that have not been issued. And so if and when that modification is issued, for example, the discussion of the driveway, if that driveway were to disappear, that would be taken into consideration prior to issuance of the design.
Okay, and then my second concern is I have older clients, and this alternative is getting rid of my handicap parking spot.
Yep, it does. It maintains one over on First Avenue North, right here, with access to the curb ramp here. But yes, the one in front would have to be gone because of the separation between the roadway and the curb in this alternative.
And the probability of this alternative being developed
Is heavily dependent on public input.
Okay, perfect.
So that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. This is exactly why we're here, to get this type of feedback on all of the alternatives that are out there, and give opportunity for those decision makers to be able to take all of that into consideration when they make the choice.
And this is Christian with the city engineering department jumping in here. Eventually this decision will go to council to be decided on. So we'll get as much input as we can and provide that to the city council. And at the end of the day, they'll make a decision on the whole thing. So
yep,
that's kind of the final hands for the decision.
It is, and we heavily encourage any input that anybody has, regardless of which alternative it would support. That's the whole reason why we conduct these meetings, is to make sure, for example, like you said, you know, if you have an individual concern regarding that specific issue, that all of those things can be brought to and viewed by the decision makers on the project. You hit the nail on the head there.
And so I'm going to go back to my question of how much freedom does council have to say? Like, can council say, we like this piece, but we don't like this piece? Can they get into the deep weeds? Or are they kind of given option A or option B?
Well, we will bring it forward as option A and option B, but I don't think we can say that you can't use parts from both. So if they get into the weeds, I think that's up to them if they want to do that.
We obviously want to avoid having them start
It's
to be
much,
like, whoa.
It's much easier as far as engineering staff, and then CPS by extension being our consultant, if we can just bring forward 2 options that are very definitive. If you start
100%.
getting into the weeds, it really starts to slow down the progression of the project. So that's why we try to narrow it down as much as possible.
Yep.
So.
And it's why I want to try to help anywhere I
Yeah.
can, getting extra public input on this one.
Yeah.
Because I think it is important to hear both from you, Jen, on this, but also hear from Phil, also hear from, you know, the school district and everybody and all the thoughts on that.
Mhm. So in comparing these, when we did our parking stall count, we went from Demers Avenue to the driveway between First and Second Avenues North. And the reason for that is the bump outs actually extend into the block between First and Second. So keep in mind, if somebody goes out and counts parking spots and you say, well, between Demers and First, that's not how many there are. That's the length that we considered in this analysis here. So today there are 21 parking stalls out there. And if the option with the bulb outs were constructed, there would be 17. And
Okay.
basically the big reason for those parking stalls disappearing is that the bump outs, they take more curb area to do. If the protected bicycle lanes and the enhanced multimodal features were constructed, there would be 7 stalls remaining along that stretch. The total width behind the curb, so the distance between the curb and the building with the bulb outs would be 14.5 feet. With the other features, we'd have to go a little wider. We'd lose about 2 feet there. And that passable width, again, where you can walk because of the location of the streetscape features, on the bulb out option would be 7 feet. And on the enhanced multimodal and bike lane option would be 5 feet wide. And driving lanes on the bulb out option would be 16 feet wide. And it's notable too that that 16 feet is wide enough to accommodate the bicycle traffic, just not separated. And under the bicycle lanes being separated, the driving lane for the vehicles would remain at 10 feet. And so again, just to point out, when we talk about that passable width, we're talking about the area of the sidewalk that you can actually get to with your feet. And so in comparing these two options, again, the basis alternative being the one that was in the urban grant program application, if we were to construct the bicycle lanes and enhanced multimodal features alternative, we would gain those protected bicycle lanes. We would gain a separate bus lane for that type of travel. And there would also be that potential new bus stop and shelter at Demers Avenue there. So the cons associated with that would be the fewer parking spaces. We estimate that that option would cost about $1 million more than the base alternative to build. And that sounds like a really high number, but the primary reasons for that are the additional length, the reconstruction of the Demers Avenue intersection, and also the additional cost to relocate the utilities. So when we move those curbs out, the utilities would have to be moved accordingly. And also the construction of the raised medians between the traffic area and the bicycle lanes. We would not have the bulb outs for pedestrian safety. The bus stop location being up by Demers Avenue could potentially impede traffic movements there. So if you're, for example, coming from the bridge and you want to turn right onto 4th Street, if the bus is parked at that bus stop, you wouldn't be able to turn there. And also a consultant did a traffic analysis on that intersection. And without the left turn lane, which would have to go away if those additional lanes were constructed, the queuing or the lineup of cars on 4th Avenue would be about 75 to 100 feet longer. And under 2045, which is basically the design window for this project, under the projected traffic conditions in 2045, the lineup of cars would be over 300 feet long along 4th, waiting for that light. There would also be some temporary or potential future impacts there. If you picture where Central is, if those bike lanes separated and those medians were extended down, there would be impacts to the existing drop-off area and the configuration there. And the last major difference that we have identified here is the temporary lack of continuity with that layout. until the future extensions were developed. So basically, this configuration would exist for one block, and then it would go back to what exists today, either way. These paragraphs here are excerpted from the downtown transportation study in which the enhanced multimodal feature option appeared. And in that study, they actually recommend that the bulb outs be constructed as part of this project. Not necessarily because it's better overall, but because as we kind of mentioned, this project only incorporates one block. And so it may not result in these features getting used and may produce pushback for future bicycle facility projects. So there is consideration of potentially impeding those future projects there. And so they did prioritize as well in that study construction of the bulb outs. But again, we do want to make sure that that alternative is fully considered. So at this time, I know we've had some good input along the way, but we want to make sure that if you guys have specific questions about the project, that we get that. And so I would open it up to the visitors that we have here, if there's anything that we either haven't covered or that you'd like to go back to at this time.
Not for me, thank you.
I have thoughts. I can email them and type them up. It's some thoughts on the pros and cons list. I feel like there's a lot of things that are missing from the pros list. Okay. I also feel like there's some things that are maybe even missing from the cons list. I think some of the impacts that it has on the South 4th Street businesses, having yet another closure, is probably the biggest negative that shows up in my mind. Like, these people have had 3 years of closure, and one more for something that is, when you start to look at it in those small scales, really small. As far as the pros go, one single parking spot for a car takes up at a maximum of 4 people, while a bike lane can transition an entire community. So those are some of my thoughts. I also, the bus stop, and like, this is me speaking, it's like, I don't want another bus stop, but I don't see the bus stop being advantageous for that block. While I feel like leaving some sort of a parking room, or even leaving some sort of a space for Jen's clients, things like that, I think has a lot stronger impact with the protected bike lane. And so I don't know how much those two, it feels like we're either going to get one or two, and there's no way to change either of those ones. And so I just need to bring that up and speak my piece in that scenario. Okay. Well, as far as how to do that, then I just had a map inserted here in case we needed to look at the overview again for either way. We do want to let everybody know that this meeting, the recording, will be available on the city website, and the instructions to access it are here. You go to grandforksgov.com, click on government meeting information, and go to the meeting calendar, and then the information will be on the calendar for today's date. Okay. The comment period will stay open for 15 days, so it'll be till June 25th. And there's a lot of different ways to submit those. You can either just email me directly. My email address is listed on here. Make sure you put virtual public input meeting in the subject heading, because that helps us sort those out and make sure that we report them all. And on the sign-in sheet that you get via email, since you attended today or requested the Zoom link, it will include a comment option before you click submit. So you'll be able to do that. And then again, you'll be provided a form via email that you can mail physically. And the address to send that will be on the form. So if anybody here doesn't have additional input, we are going to leave the Zoom meeting open for a while, just in case anybody else logs on. We will be here till 6:30, so feel free to send us anything up to and until then, and we'll be here to answer questions in that window. And always too, even after the comment period closes, feel free to get a hold of us. This is just the date to get it included in the official project record and submittal, so it will be published along with the project documents. Two other questions, and these are these are always those questions that are impossible to answer, so I'm not asking for firm details. Any idea how long a project like this is gonna take? I mean, obviously it depends on which decision for the layout and things like that, but is it 1/3 the time of a third street, or is it like still that same amount of time?
I would anticipate that overall, as compared to a third street, the overall construction duration would probably be about 40%.
Okay.
And a lot of the reason, and that's for the basis option with the similar construction features. And the reason for that is that the third street construction project is 3 blocks long, but there's only 2 intersections. Okay. So on 4th Street, it's 1 block long, but it still has the intersection. So
Yeah.
on a relative scale. However, there are still all of those things that need to come,
Always, yeah.
in front. So I would anticipate that it would take the majority of a construction season to go from start to finish. And I would also anticipate that the required completion date would be similarly set.
Cool.
Conversely, with the protected bike lanes option, I think the required completion date would still be similar. We would still anticipate and expect that this would be constructed in a single construction season.
Okay.
But off the cuff, I would say the actual construction, because of the medians, things like all the extra utility construction, cure times on things that have to be constructed sequentially, things like that, I would say the anticipated construction duration would probably be about double. Again, because of the addition of the Demers Avenue intersection, and all of those things. So off the cuff, that would be my good faith estimate, would be about double the actual time.
And is this following somewhat of a similar timeline as far as bid going out, things like that? It feels like about 1 year ago this time, we were sitting here doing the same thing for here, so.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Jen? Anything else come up while you were listening, thinking?
No, ma'am.
All right. Well, as far as the group that's here, then I think we'll adjourn. And thank you for joining us. Feel free to either stay on to see if anyone else logs on, or to depart. And again, this, as well as anything that occurs after this time until 6:30 this evening, will be available on the recording and posted on the city website, probably starting tomorrow.